Welcome to this video. There are mysteries the world has chosen to forget. And then there's this one. A town erased from every map. A family that vanished overnight, leaving every door locked from the inside. No police record, no birth certificate, no death notice. As if they never existed. But last winter, a hiker found something buried in the snow. An old camera with one undeveloped roll of film. When the photos were finally printed, one image showed a face no one should have ever seen again. This is the most mysterious story in the world. The Forgotten Town. Open quote. It began with a storm, the kind that makes the power flicker, the sky rumble, and the wind sound like it's whispering your name. Close quote. The blizzard had rolled over the mountains without warning. For 3 days, the highways were shut, and only one man dared to hike through the whiteout, a wildlife photographer named Ethan Cole. Ethan wasn't searching for a story. He was chasing a rumor. A local ranger had once mentioned an old mining town that used to exist somewhere near the northern ridge. A town wiped from every modern map, forgotten after a mysterious evacuation in 1952. No one ever found it again. Ethan thought it would make a great photo series, Ghosts of the North. But what he found wasn't a ghost town. It was something no one should have ever seen. By the third day of the storm, Ethan's GPS was dead, his radio frozen, and visibility less than 10 feet. He stumbled through a wall of snow, praying he'd find shelter before dark. And then, through the fog, he saw it. A street sign half buried in ice. The words barely visible, but enough to read, "Welcome to St. Vale." He froze. St. Vale wasn't supposed to exist anymore. The town lay silent beneath a thick crust of snow. Rows of wooden houses, shattered windows, rusted cars from the 1950s still parked on the streets. Every door was locked from the inside, every window sealed shut, and there wasn't a single footprint anywhere. Ethan pushed through the drifted snow, his camera clicking as he went, documenting every strange, haunting corner. He stopped at a diner with its neon sign still hanging crooked, open 24 hours. Inside, the tables were still set, half-eaten meals, coffee cups frozen in place, a jukebox waiting to play a song that never came. Time had stopped here. But how? He found a newspaper near the counter dated June 12, 1952. The headline read, open quote, "Town meeting tonight, St. Vale to vote on evacuation plan." Close quote. But the rest of the page was water-damaged and unreadable. As the storm outside howled, Ethan decided to wait out the night in the diner. He set up his tent inside, made a small fire in a metal bucket, and began scrolling through his photos. That's when he noticed something strange. In one of the pictures, a wide shot of the diner from the outside, there was a figure in the window. A woman, standing perfectly still. He zoomed in. The shape was blurry, but the outline was clear. Long hair, pale face, staring directly toward the camera. Ethan felt the temperature drop instantly. He turned toward the window. Nothing. Only the storm, screaming against the glass. By morning, the blizzard had calmed. Ethan packed his gear and followed the main street, hoping to find clues about what happened to the townspeople. At the edge of town stood a small schoolhouse. The doors were bolted, but the lock had rusted away. Inside, rows of desks still faced the chalkboard, and on it, written in white chalk, were 3 words, open quote, "Do not return," close quote. Ethan snapped a photo, the 30th one on his roll. And then behind him, a faint creak echoed through the hall. He turned, expecting to see the wind move something, but there was no wind inside, and yet the door he had entered through was now open. He ran outside, heart pounding. The air was heavy, silent again, like the whole place was holding its breath. He decided it was time to leave. But when he checked his compass, it spun wildly. Every direction pointed north. He pulled out his phone. No signal. His map, frozen screen. And then, from somewhere beyond the houses, came a faint music box melody, a soft, delicate tune, playing over and over from nowhere. Ethan followed it down a narrow path between 2 houses, leading to a small white church at the edge of town. The melody grew louder as he approached, echoing through the empty streets. Inside the church, dozens of candles were still standing, melted halfway as if someone had left them burning years ago. And at the altar, a small box rested, carved from dark wood, turning on its own. It was the music box. He reached out slowly, stopping the crank. The tune died, and in the silence that followed, he heard something else, a whisper. A voice, faint but clear. Open quote, Why did you come back? Close quote. Ethan spun around. No one there. He backed away, flashlight trembling, when he noticed a door behind the altar slightly open. Inside, he found a basement staircase leading down into total darkness. Against every instinct, he followed it, flashlight flickering in the damp air. The room below was filled with old photographs, hundreds of them, pinned to the walls, scattered across tables, hanging from strings. Each photo showed faces, men, women, children, all with their eyes blacked out. At the center of the room stood an old wooden chair, and on it, a camera, the same model Ethan used. He froze. This wasn't just a forgotten place. Someone had been here, someone who knew he'd be coming. He stepped closer to the camera and saw a single undeveloped roll of film inside. It was labeled in faded ink, open quote, property of E. Cole, close quote. Ethan's breath caught. That was his name. He stumbled backward, the flashlight dropping to the floor. The beam hit something on the wall, a photograph pinned at eye level. It was a picture of him, standing in the diner, taken last night. And that's when he realized someone or something had been taking photos while he was asleep. The air grew colder. The light dimmed. Footsteps echoed from above, slow, deliberate, coming down the stairs. Ethan grabbed his camera and sprinted up toward the church door, snow swirling in blinding sheets outside. He didn't look back. Not once. As he disappeared into the storm, the church door creaked shut behind him. And in that moment, one candle flickered to life on the altar. The vanished family. Open quote. When you walk away from a nightmare, you expect to wake up. But what if the nightmare follows you home? Close quote. 2 weeks after escaping the forgotten town of St. Vale, Ethan Cole sat alone in his Denver apartment, surrounded by silence. He hadn't told anyone what happened. Not his editor, not the police, not even his closest friend. Because every time he tried to explain, his mind replayed that final moment, the photo of himself in the diner, taken before he ever found the camera. He couldn't explain that. No one could. Ethan developed the photos he'd taken, one by one, in his home studio. Most came out normal: the diner, the church, the empty streets. But a few weren't. In one photo, the music box was closed. In the next, taken seconds later, it was open, and a faint reflection of a woman's face stared back from the glass cover. Her expression was cold, almost pleading, and in the bottom corner of the image, handwritten in black ink, were the words, open quote, "Find the Hartleys," close quote. The name haunted him for days. Ethan searched online, archives, old census data, missing persons records. Finally, buried in a 1953 local newspaper scan, he found something. Open quote. The Hartley family of St. Vale reported missing after mine explosion. Case closed, presumed dead. Close quote. A husband, wife, and their only daughter. No bodies ever recovered. He should have stopped there, but he couldn't. Something in that town wanted him to dig deeper. And for the first time in years, Ethan wasn't chasing a story, he was chasing an answer. He tracked down the journalist who wrote the original 1953 article, Margaret Lang, now 86 years old, living in a care home on the outskirts of Boulder. When he visited her, she was sitting by the window, wrapped in a blue blanket, her eyes sharp despite the years. Open quote. You're not the first one to ask about St. Vale, she said quietly, but you might be the last. Close quote. Ethan showed her one of the photos, the diner frozen in time, the do not return message on the school board. Margaret's hands trembled. Open quote. I took that picture, she whispered. Close quote. Ethan blinked. That's impossible. This was taken weeks ago. Open quote. No, she said, staring at the photo. I took it 70 years ago. Same angle, same snow, same everything. Close quote. Her voice cracked. Open quote. But St. Vale burned down, Mr. Cole. It shouldn't exist anymore. Close quote. She told him what really happened. In 1952, St. Vale wasn't just a mining town. It was built around a geothermal research facility run by a private contractor for the US government. Something went wrong underground. A collapse, followed by unexplained tremors and electromagnetic surges that crippled the entire area. The residents were ordered to evacuate. Most did, but one family refused, the Hartleys. No one ever saw them again. A year later, the town mysteriously reappeared for one night. Visible on radar, seen by pilots, then vanished from all detection as if it had never been there. Open quote. The government sealed everything, Margaret said. No one was allowed back. Those who tried never returned. Close quote. Ethan leaned forward. But I was there. It's real. I walked those streets. Margaret smiled sadly. Open quote. Then maybe you never left. Close quote. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat in his studio staring at the photos again. When he flipped to the last one, the image of himself in the diner, something new had appeared. Behind his shoulder stood a family of three. The man's face was pale, the woman's eyes hollow, and between them, a small girl clutching a music box. The same box. The next morning, Ethan drove straight to the National Archives in Washington, D.C. He requested any files on St. Val and Hartley family, 1952. The clerk returned pale-faced, whispering, open quote, you shouldn't have that name, close quote. But minutes later, a sealed brown envelope arrived on the desk. No return stamp, no signature. Just one word, written on the flap, truth. Inside were 6 black and white photos, each dated June 12, 1952, the same day printed on the newspaper Ethan found in the diner. Every photo was of St. Vale. But in the final one, the Hartley family stood outside the church, smiling. And behind them was Ethan Cole. Same face, same jacket, same camera. He dropped the envelope, heart racing. How was that possible? He hadn't even been born until 1987. He replayed the timeline in his head, the camera labeled property of E. Cole, the photos appearing on their own, the ghost town repeating itself like a loop in time. It wasn't a haunting, it was a recording, a memory trapped in time. Replaying again and again, waiting for someone to press play, and somehow he'd become part of it. He returned home and began reviewing the negatives again. That's when the phone rang. A static-filled voice whispered on the other end, open quote, Ethan Cole, do not return to St. Vale. They're still down there. Close quote. The line went dead. He froze. No one had that number. When he looked back at his desk, the photos were gone. Every single one. Vanished. In their place lay the music box. The same one from St. Vale. Still turning. Still playing that same soft, haunting melody. And when Ethan lifted the lid, he found a small slip of paper folded inside. He unfolded it slowly, his hands trembling. It said, open quote, she's waiting. Close quote. For days, Ethan debated whether to go back. Logic screamed no, but something deeper, that unexplainable pull, kept whispering yes. He felt connected to the Hartleys now, to their daughter, especially. He could almost picture her face in his dreams, hear her laughter echoing in the snow. On the 7th night, unable to resist any longer, Ethan packed his gear and left again for the mountains. Before he crossed state lines, he stopped at a gas station diner. The waitress, an older woman with tired eyes, noticed the music box on his table. Open quote. Where'd you get that? She asked quietly. Close quote. Ethan looked up. You've seen one before? Open quote. My grandmother used to live in St. Vale, she said. Said the last thing she heard before the town disappeared was that song. Close quote. Ethan's breath caught. Do you know what happened to them? Open quote. She said the town wasn't destroyed. The woman whispered. It was taken. Close quote. He left a tip on the table and walked out into the snow, the music box still echoing faintly behind him. The road stretched ahead, cold, silent, and endless. But somewhere in that frozen distance, the truth waited, and it was calling his name. The film roll. Open quote. Some say the past is gone forever, but what if it's still there, replaying itself like an unfinished story, waiting for you to step inside? Close quote. The snow fell heavier the second time Ethan Cole returned to St. Vale. The mountain roads were barely visible, and his headlights caught nothing but swirling white fog. Yet, the deeper he drove, the stronger that strange pull became, like gravity itself was dragging him back. By the time he reached the ridge, his compass had stopped working again. The air grew colder, unnaturally still. And then, just as before, the town appeared through the mist, frozen in time. The Welcome to St. Vale sign leaned in the snow, exactly where he'd seen it weeks ago. No footprints, no sound, only silence. Ethan parked his truck near the diner. As soon as he stepped out, the music box in his pocket began to play by itself, that same soft tune repeating endlessly. He whispered to himself, "You wanted the truth, Cole. Now go find it." Inside the diner, everything was the same. The tables set, the coffee frozen mid-pour, the clock on the wall still stuck at 9:47. But this time, something new waited for him on the counter. A note, written in neat cursive handwriting. Open quote. In the church, beneath the cross. Close quote. Ethan's stomach tightened. He knew exactly where to go. The white church stood at the edge of town, its door hanging open, snow spilling across the floorboards like a river of ice. Candles still lined the altar, half melted but glowing faintly, though Ethan hadn't lit them. He approached slowly, flashlight trembling in his hand. Behind the altar stood the same wooden cross, and beneath it, a trapdoor. He pulled it open, and a rush of cold air poured out. Below, the staircase descended into the darkness, the same basement he'd seen before. He descended one step at a time. Each creak echoed through the emptiness. When he reached the bottom, his flashlight caught the same chaotic sight. Hundreds of photographs plastered across the walls. But something had changed. Now every photo showed only one person. Him. Ethan standing in the street. Ethan holding the camera. Ethan asleep in the diner. And then one photo different from the rest. A family portrait of the Hartleys, smiling, holding hands with him. He stepped closer, shaking. Pinned beneath that photo was a small metal canister, an old film roll with a cracked label. Open quote, St. Vale Project, XP, 1952, close quote. His pulse quickened. This was it. The same roll that had been in the camera before, the one marked property of E. Cole. He pocketed it carefully, backed away from the wall, and whispered, open quote, I'll finish what you started, close quote. As he climbed back to the surface, the church bells suddenly rang, slow, heavy, and offbeat. Ethan froze. The bells hadn't worked in 70 years. Then came footsteps, soft, deliberate, circling the pews. He turned his flashlight, but no one was there. Only shadows moving where light should have been still. Ethan sprinted to his truck, heart hammering. He didn't stop until he reached a motel 30 miles away, a flickering neon sign reading, Rest Haven. Inside his room, he locked every door and curtain. Then, with trembling hands, he loaded the film roll into his portable darkroom kit. The chemicals hissed as he processed the negatives. One by one, the images began to appear. At first, they looked like ordinary black and white shots of St. Vale, the church, the school, the diner. But as the last frame developed, Ethan felt his blood run cold. It showed himself, standing inside the church basement, holding the camera. Behind him, the Hartley family. And in the corner of the frame, half shrouded in darkness, a tall figure wearing a black coat and a gas mask. The timestamp on the photo, June 12, 1952. 73 years before Ethan was even born. He printed the photos, spreading them across the motel bed. Each one seemed to move when he looked away, tiny distortions, shifting shadows. He blinked and saw faint words burned into the negatives, letters appearing only under light. Open quote, they're not gone. They're waiting below. Close quote. Ethan grabbed his phone and tried calling his editor. No signal. He switched on the TV for background noise, but it only played static. Then from inside his backpack, the music box started again. This time, the melody sounded slower, wrong, almost like a recording being played backward. He yanked it open. Inside, another note had appeared, written in the same handwriting as before. Open quote, the film is the key. Finish the story. Close quote. By morning, Ethan drove back to Denver. He needed answers, someone who could explain the photos, the timestamp, the impossible connection. He met with Dr. Alan Pierce, a physics professor who specialized in temporal anomalies, a man who had worked with old government files during the Cold War. Ethan spread the photos on the table. Dr. Pierce studied them carefully, his expression growing more disturbed by the second. Open quote. These look like exposures from Project St. Vale, he murmured. An experiment that was never supposed to exist. Close quote. Ethan leaned forward. What kind of experiment? Pierce hesitated. Open quote. They were testing a resonance field, energy frequencies that could bend electromagnetic waves and possibly time itself. Close quote. He looked up. Open quote. St. Vale wasn't destroyed by an explosion. It was trapped in a temporal loop, frozen on June 12, 1952. Close quote. Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. So when I entered the town, open quote, you didn't enter a place, Pierce said. You entered a moment, a day that keeps repeating itself. And that camera, it doesn't just take pictures. It captures what exists between the seconds. Close quote. Ethan sat in silence. Everything started making sense. The repeating clock, the identical photos, the reflection that moved when he didn't. Dr. Pierce continued, open quote, If the loop is unstable, it pulls in anyone who comes too close. The Hartleys were the first. You may be next, close quote. Ethan whispered, open quote, then how do I stop it? Close quote. The professor looked grim. Open quote, you can't stop time, Mr. Cole. You can only decide where you belong in it. Close quote. That night, Ethan sat alone in his studio again, staring at the film roll lying on his desk. Every instinct told him to destroy it, burn it, bury it, forget it. But part of him knew the story wasn't finished. And as the music box started to play again, slower this time, almost like a heartbeat, he saw something new forming on the last photo. A faint outline still developing even after the chemicals had dried. A hand, reaching out of the frame, grabbing his shoulder, the light flickered, and for a split second, Ethan saw his reflection in the window. But it wasn't his reflection at all. It was her, the little girl from the Hartley family, smiling, whispering the hidden truth. Open quote, some truths aren't buried, they're hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right person to remember them. Close quote. Ethan Cole hadn't slept in 2 days. The photographs from St. Vale covered every inch of his apartment, taped to walls, spread across the floor, pinned to his mirror. And every few hours he swore they changed. The angles, the shadows, the faces. Sometimes the little girl smiled wider. Other times her eyes were shut tight as if she knew what came next. He couldn't ignore it anymore. Dr. Alan Pierce's words echoed in his mind. Open quote, you didn't enter a place, you entered a moment. Close quote, if that was true, St. Vale wasn't just a ghost town. It was a loop in time. A day replaying forever, trapping everything inside it. And somehow, he was becoming part of it. Ethan grabbed his camera, the old film roll in the music box, then drove to meet Pierce one last time. But when he arrived at the professor's office, the door was wide open. Inside, chaos. Papers scattered, drawers ripped out, the computers smashed, and on the wall, scrawled in red marker, open quote, the loop is open. A chill ran down his spine. He turned to leave, but something on the floor caught his eye. Pierce's ID badge. Next to it, a photo. It was the Hartley family again, but this time taken inside a laboratory. Rows of old equipment surrounded them, and behind the glass window stood a team of scientists, including Dr. Pierce himself. The photo was dated June 11, 1952. Ethan froze. Pierce hadn't been born until the 1960s, yet here he was, in a photo from 1952. That's when Ethan realized something even more disturbing. The lab in the photo matched one of the hidden facilities marked on a declassified military map, deep beneath the St. Vale mines. It wasn't a town. It was a test site. Ethan followed the trail north again, past the old mining road that had been closed for decades. Snow whipped around him as he drove deeper into the mountains, the music box humming faintly in the passenger seat. Its song seemed to guide him, as if it knew where to go. Hours later, he reached a steel gate buried in snow. A rusted sign read, open quote, federal property, no entry, close quote. He climbed over. Beyond the gate stood a concrete bunker, half collapsed and frozen in time. Above the entrance, barely visible, were the words, open quote, Project St. Vale, Research Unit 7, close quote. Inside, the air was thick with dust and metal. Old machinery lined the corridors, massive control panels with shattered dials and blinking red lights that shouldn't have power after 70 years. He walked deeper, flashlight cutting through the dark. Each door was labeled with words like experimental zone, temporal field control, and subject observation room. In one chamber, a file lay open on a desk, a government report stamped top secret. He read the first line, open quote, objective, to test the containment of temporal resonance within civilian environments. Close quote. Further down, a note in handwriting identical to the one from the church said, open quote, Family H, primary test subjects, emotional stability key to loop duration. Close quote. Family H, the Hartleys. Ethan's breathing quickened. They weren't victims, they were experiments. The file continued, open quote, test date, June 12, 1952, loop initiation successful, temporal feedback detected, entire town absorbed, field unstable, close quote below it a signature. Dr. Alan Pierce. Ethan staggered back, disbelief turning into horror. Oh quote. No, that's impossible. Close quote. The lights flickered. Somewhere deeper in the bunker, a door slammed shut. He ran toward the sound. The hallway stretched endlessly, twisting, echoing, like the building itself was alive. Then he reached a large control room and froze. Inside the glass chamber stood the Hartley family, exactly as they appeared in the photos. Frozen mid-motion like statues made of light. Their eyes were open, their faces peaceful, and in the little girl's hands, the music box still spinning silently. Ethan whispered, open quote, "You're real," close quote. Then he saw movement, a flicker in the glass. A tall figure in a black coat stepped out of the shadows behind the family. A gas mask glinted in the light. Ethan's heart stopped. He lifted his camera instinctively, and the flash fired. The figure vanished. The glass cracked. An alarm blared through the bunker, red lights flashing wildly. Ethan stumbled backward as the ground shook beneath him. Dust rained from the ceiling. Through the chaos, a metallic voice echoed from the speakers. Open quote. Containment breach detected. Loop integrity compromised. Close quote. The room shimmered. Walls bending. Air distorting like heat waves. Ethan could see glimpses of something impossible. Other times, children playing in daylight, a mine collapsing, soldiers running through smoke, the past and present folding together like pages in a burning book. He ran, but every hallway led back to the same door. No matter which way he turned, he always ended up in front of the chamber again. Inside, the Hartleys that faces began to move. Their eyes turned toward him, and the little girl smiled. Open quote. You shouldn't have come back. Close quote. The glass shattered completely, and the world went white. When Ethan opened his eyes, he was lying in the snow outside the diner. The sky was calm. The town looked untouched. Had it all been a dream? He checked his camera. Still intact. He looked at the screen. There was a new photo. A perfect shot of the chamber, just before it exploded. In the background, half hidden behind the control panel, stood himself. Ethan stumbled to his feet, confused, disoriented. Every part of him wanted to leave. To run until St. Vale was nothing but a fading blur behind him. But something caught his attention near the diner's window. Inside, the jukebox flickered to life. Lights glowing, the same song playing softly. Open quote. The music box melody. Close quote. He pressed his hand against the glass, whispering, open quote, what do you want from me? Close quote. And then, in the reflection, he saw them, the Hartleys, standing behind him. The little girl holding the music box. The man and woman smiling faintly. The girl whispered, her voice overlapping with the song. Open quote. You opened the loop. Now finish it. Close quote. Ethan backed away, terrified. The snow began to swirl violently again, the wind howling with 1,000 distant whispers. He sprinted toward his truck, jumped inside, and sped away down the mountain road. But as he drove, the world around him began to change. The trees flickered between seasons, green to gold to bare branches in seconds. The sun rose and set 3 times in a minute. Time itself was unraveling. He glanced at his reflection in the rearview mirror. For a brief moment, it wasn't him looking back. It was Dr. Alan Pierce, and Pierce smiled. The shadow in the film. Open quote. Sometimes, the truth hides not in what we see, but in what refuses to disappear. Close quote. Ethan woke up on the floor of the old radio station. The fire had gone out. The wind outside had calmed. For the first time in days, there was silence. But when he opened his eyes, he wasn't alone. A man sat across from him, wrapped in a heavy coat, face hidden beneath a scarf and hat. He was staring at the camera Ethan had carried since the start of his journey. Don't touch that, the stranger said quietly. His voice was raspy, as if it hadn't been used in years. Ethan sat up slowly. Who are you? How did you get here? The man didn't answer right away. He looked at the photos scattered across the floor, all images Ethan had taken since he entered St. Vale. Then he said, I used to live here, before it was erased. Ethan's heart began to race. You mean St. Vale? You're from here? The stranger nodded. My name's Thomas. I was 12 when the night came, the night everyone vanished. He pointed to a wall of faded documents pinned behind the radio console, evacuation orders, hand-drawn maps, and one photo showing a group of men in radiation suits. What happened? Ethan asked. Thomas leaned forward. It wasn't a natural disaster. It wasn't a storm. It was an experiment, a government project. They built something here, something that could manipulate memory and light. A camera that didn't just capture images, it trapped moments. Souls. Ethan froze. Trapped souls? Thomas nodded grimly. They called it Project Echo. They said it could preserve time, freeze people forever in their last living image. But something went wrong. The machine didn't stop recording. It kept feeding. Anyone who stayed in St. Vale too long became part of the photograph. Ethan looked at his own camera. It was the same model described in the old blueprints scattered on the desk, and the roll of film labeled property of E. Cole. It wasn't just his. It was a message. Thomas stood and pointed to the door. You have to destroy that film. If you don't, the town will keep pulling you back. That's how it survives, by making people remember. Ethan's mind was spinning. But how could this camera even exist before I was born? Thomas's eyes narrowed. Because it's not from this time. Neither are you. The words hit Ethan like ice. What are you talking about? Thomas walked toward him, slow and deliberate. When I was 12, the machine took everyone. My parents, my friends. I escaped into the mountains. When I came back, I found the photograph. The one of me, standing outside the church. But I hadn't been there. Someone else had taken it. Someone who looked exactly like you. Ethan felt his blood run cold. You're saying I've been here before? Thomas nodded. Again and again. Every few decades, the town calls you back. You take the same pictures. You follow the same path. You run from the same shadows. And when you leave, the cycle resets. Ethan shook his head. No, that's not possible. Thomas leaned closer. Then look at the negatives. Ethan's hands trembled as he opened his camera and pulled the roll of film free. He held it up to the flickering light of a lantern. The images were faint, distorted, but one stood out clearly. It was a picture of himself, standing beside Thomas in this very room. Same lighting, same angle, same fire burned out in the background. Except, it hadn't happened yet. Ethan stumbled backward. This is a trick! Thomas didn't move. It's not. You're part of the experiment now, and soon, you won't remember this conversation at all. Suddenly, the radio behind them crackled to life. Static hissed through the air, then a voice broke through. Open quote. Ethan Cole, return the negatives. Close quote. Ethan froze. He knew that voice. It was his own. The sound repeated, distorted but unmistakable. Open quote. Return the negatives, and you'll remember who you are. Close quote. Thomas grabbed his shoulder. Don't listen. That's the town speaking. It wants you to surrender the film. But the radio grew louder, the static pulsing like a heartbeat. Open quote. You can't escape your own image, Ethan. You are the photograph. Close quote. The lights flickered violently. Thomas backed away, shouting, Run! The room exploded in white light, blinding, searing. And when Ethan opened his eyes again, he was standing outside, alone. The radio station was gone. No footprints. No smoke. No trace of Thomas. Only his camera, lying in the snow. He picked it up, breathing heavily. Inside, the roll of film had been replaced, clean, unused. Except for one frame already exposed. He held it to the light. It showed the church, and at the door, the faint silhouette of someone standing. Not a ghost. Not a stranger. It was him. Smiling. A photograph that breathed. Open quote. Some stories don't end when the truth is found. They end when the truth finds you. Close quote. Snow drifted softly across the empty streets of St. Vale. Ethan stood in the middle of Main Street, clutching the camera to his chest. The town was silent. No wind, no echo, no sign of life, just stillness. A silence that watched him back. He turned slowly, his breath fogging in the cold. Every window in every house was dark, except one. At the far end of the street, the church window glowed faintly, a warm, flickering light. Ethan's hands trembled. The photograph in his pocket showed that same church, that same light. But in the image, there was a man at the door, a man who looked exactly like him. He walked toward the church, each step crunching in the snow. His heart pounded louder than his footsteps. And then he heard it again. Faint, familiar, the sound of the music box. It was playing that same lullaby he had heard days ago. Only this time, it wasn't coming from the church. It was coming from inside his backpack. He stopped, dropped to his knees, and unzipped it. Inside, beneath his gear and film rolls, was the wooden music box, the one he'd left behind in the church basement. It was spinning on its own. He reached to stop it, and the tune halted mid-note. The air went dead still. And then, he heard footsteps behind him, slow, heavy, crushing snow. He turned, and there he was, himself. The same coat, the same face, the same camera around his neck. Except this version of Ethan looked older, worn, eyes hollow, as if he'd lived this moment too many times. Who are you? Ethan whispered. The other version smiled sadly. I'm you, or what's left of you. Ethan stepped back, shaking his head. No, this isn't real. Oh, it's real, the older version said quietly. You came looking for a story, remember? A lost town, a mystery no one else could find. But Saint Vale isn't a story, Ethan. It's a loop, and you're the reason it keeps repeating. Ethan's voice cracked. What do you mean? I'm the reason? The older version walked closer, stopping just a few feet away. You were the first photographer who came here in 1952. You built the prototype, the echo camera. You tested it here, and when it failed, the whole town was erased from time. You swore you'd destroy it, but the machine trapped you in its own memory. Every few decades, it brings you back to finish what you started. Ethan's mind spun. His memories began flashing. Snapshots of different eras, faces of people he didn't remember meeting, a world that kept changing while he stayed the same. No, he whispered, clutching his head. No, I wasn't even born then. But even as he said it, flashes returned. His hands adjusting the machine in a 1950s laboratory, his voice recording notes about temporal capture, and a woman's voice calling from the doorway. Open quote, Ethan, stop! You don't know what it'll do. Close quote. Then, a blinding flash of white, and silence. When the memory faded, he was back in the snow, staring at his other self. The older Ethan stepped closer. Every time you come back, you take pictures. You relive the same story. You run from yourself, and each time, you forget. That's how the town survives, through your memory. Ethan looked at the camera in his hand. It was shaking. Or maybe he was. So how do I stop it? He whispered. The older version smiled faintly. You already know. You built it. Ethan looked down. At the base of the camera, beneath the lens, a small switch he had never noticed before, marked only by a faint engraving, Reset. He raised the camera, finger hovering over the switch. If I do this, he said, what happens? You end the cycle, the older version replied. But it'll erase everything, the town, the memories, even you. Ethan hesitated. What about you? The older version smiled faintly. I'll disappear too. I'm just another photograph. A tear rolled down Ethan's cheek. He looked around, the silent houses, the frozen cars, the empty world. It wasn't just a ghost town. It was a prison. And he was the key. He pressed the switch. For a moment, nothing. Then, the camera began to hum softly. Light poured from the lens, bright silver-white light, flooding the entire street. The older version stepped back, nodding slowly. You did it, Ethan. This time, it's real. The light grew stronger, swallowing the buildings, the snow, the sky. Everything dissolving like smoke in sunlight. And as the world around him vanished, Ethan heard one final whisper. Not from his double, not from the wind, but from the town itself. Open quote. Thank you for remembering us. Close quote. Silence. Then, darkness. When Ethan opened his eyes, he was standing on a hillside, camera still in hand. The storm was gone. The town was gone. Only the empty valley remained. His GPS flickered back to life, showing no trace of any settlement, no Saint Vale, no roads, nothing. He looked through the viewfinder one last time. The lens showed a faint reflection, not of the valley, but of the church, still glowing softly, as if somewhere out there, it still existed between moments. Ethan smiled weakly, lifted the camera, and took one final picture. Click. The sound echoed softly, then faded into the wind. Epilogue. 3 weeks later, hikers found a single photo near the base of the mountain. It showed a man standing in the snow, camera in hand, facing a town that wasn't there. On the back of the photo, a note written in neat handwriting read, open quote, for those who forget, remember Saint Vale. EC, close quote.